My name's Aaron Cole, and if you told me a year ago that a fight with an HOA president would start in the middle of hunting season, I would have laughed. I live out here, 40 acres of woods, no streetlights, no neighbors for miles. Just trees, wildlife, and the kind of peace city folks pay money to pretend they have. This cabin? It's not just home, it's legacy. Built by my grandfather, patched by my father, now kept alive by me and my wife, Claire. But last November, while I was deep in the forest tracking deer, someone stepped over a line they never should have crossed. The HOA president, who doesn't even live out here, decided my land was his business. Too bad for him. Claire saw everything, and she had the camera rolling. The night had been especially dark, with the only sounds being the whisper of the wind and the crunch of leaves underfoot. I was out on a solo hunt, confident in the solitude of the wilderness that wrapped our property like a protective blanket. Little did I know, someone was about to shatter that peace. As the moon soared high overhead, unbeknownst to me, a pair of determined eyes were watching my cabin. Claire, ever vigilant when I wasn't home, had noticed unusual activity near our door and set her camera to record. That fateful recording was about to change everything. Cedar Creek, our rugged patch of wilderness, sprawled over 40 untamed acres. It was a world away from the cookie-cutter neighborhoods of the city. Here, the quiet was broken only by the rustle of pine needles and the occasional call of a distant owl. I inherited this land from my family, a place where generations had lived off the land with pride and hard work. The cabin that sat at the heart of Cedar Creek was built by my grandfather, a sturdy, weathered structure that had witnessed more winters than I could count. My father patched it over the years, and now, together with my wife, Claire, we cherished it as a sanctuary of independence and legacy. Claire is the steady, insightful force in my life. With a keen eye for detail and a heart for justice, she's never been one to let injustice slide, even the kind that happened when I was out in the woods. Equipped with her ever-ready camera, she has a knack for capturing moments that most would simply miss. It was her natural vigilance that first alerted her that someone was near our cabin when I was away. Cedar Creek is as free-spirited as it gets. Vast fields, rolling hills, and thick clusters of woods that shield us from the modern world. Out here, there are no neighbors in the traditional sense. Our closest company is the wildlife that roams the land and the silence that feels as thick as the fog on a cold morning. It's this very sense of freedom that I defend with every fiber of my being. In stark contrast to our world is Crescent Heights, the nearby subdivision where rules are everything and the homeowners association, HOA, reigns supreme. The HOA president, Marty Edwards, lives in a pristine mansion in Crescent Heights, a world that values uniformity over individuality. Marty, though never having set foot in Cedar Creek, sees it as a wild, unruly outlier that must be tamed. His self-appointed duty is to extend his rigid standards beyond the neatly trimmed lawns of his own community, and that's exactly what he did when he decided my land was fair game for his intrusion. Marty believed that if he could improve life for everyone, he should be allowed to enforce his rules even on private property. He prided himself on his ability to police every detail, and his disdain for independent living was well known. To him, Cedar Creek was merely an inconvenient obstacle, a place of chaos that needed order, and I, with my free-spirited lifestyle and legacy cabin, was the perfect target. That was his mistake. In his overreach, he didn't count on having Claire on my side, an ally with both the eyes of a hawk and a camera that never slept. It was late last November when I set out on a hunting trip, completely immersed in the rhythm of the wilderness. I followed the tracks of a particularly elusive buck deep into the woods, trusting my instincts and the quiet of the forest to guide me. Hours passed, and I was lost in the thrill of the hunt, unaware that a different kind of intrusion was unfolding at home. Back at the cabin, Claire sat by the window with her camera poised. A soft rustle, unusual for a quiet night, caught her attention. She peered into the darkness and noticed a figure approaching our cabin. At first, she assumed it was a deer or perhaps a wanderer. But as the figure drew nearer, her heart sank. It was Marty Edwards, the HOA president from Crescent Heights, unmistakably out of place in our secluded woods. Marty had apparently slithered onto our property with a purpose. In his stiff suit and with a clipboard clutched tightly to his chest, he moved with an air of arrogance. I later learned that he had not been content with simply sending threats or fines via phone calls. He had trespassed into our sanctuary. His rationale was flimsy at best. He claimed that our cabin and property did not meet community standards and that his intervention was meant to bring order to what he perceived as a chaotic lot. Claire's quick thinking ensured that the entire episode was captured on video. The recording showed Marty methodically surveying the property, taking notes, and even stepping inside our cabin as if he had the right to do so. His actions were bold and invasive, and it was clear he believed that because Cedar Creek wasn't his domain, he could do as he pleased. Every moment was recorded, his confident strut, his dismissive gaze at the rustic furnishings, and his eventual attempt to exit the cabin abruptly when he realized that he might have been caught on camera. When I returned from the hunt later that evening, exhaustion and adrenaline mixed as I drove through the winding roads leading home. I was greeted not by the expected peace, but by a flurry of flashing lights and the murmur of anxious neighbors. Claire met me at the door, her expression a mix of concern and determination, and showed me the video. The implications were clear. Marty Edwards had not only trespassed on our land, but had done so in a calculated manner to enforce his narrow view of what our property should be. That night, as I reviewed the footage and listened to Claire's impassioned recounting, anger surged within me, a burning desire for justice that I knew I could not let go unanswered. I started by compiling all the digital evidence, screenshots of Marty's note-taking, the time-stamped video of his intrusion, and testimonies from a couple of neighbors who had heard raised voices and seen unfamiliar vehicles near our property. I drafted a formal complaint and sent it to the HOA board, insisting that Marty's actions be investigated and that he face disciplinary measures. But deep down, I knew that Marty's audacity was symptomatic of a larger, more oppressive mindset that had long plagued Crescent Meadows. His repeated intrusions weren't just about enforcing rules. They were personal, aimed squarely at breaking the spirit of independent living that my family had nurtured for generations. The more I prepared, the more resolute I became. This was no longer just about a single trespass. It was about sending a resounding message that private property rights were sacrosanct. I began planning a counterstrike that would showcase not only my legal right to protect my property, but also my determination to turn the tables on Marty Edwards and the overbearing influence of the HOA. I decided that if Marty thought he could dictate the standards on my land, he would soon learn that my rules were just as robust. I started researching alternative measures and possibilities to safeguard my property while also sending a clear message to Marty and others who would follow his example. It was then that an audacious idea struck me: to leverage my long-standing local reputation and resources in a way that would force Marty's hand. I planned a series of initiatives, public meetings, digital campaigns, and community outreach that would rally every resident in Crescent Meadows behind the cause of property rights and creative freedom. The evidence of Marty's overreach became the cornerstone of my plan, and I was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. That night, with the video evidence burning in my mind and Claire's unwavering support at my side, I vowed that I would not let Marty Edwards or any HOA enforcer infringe upon the sanctity of my home and heritage. Our legacy, built over decades in these woods, would not be diminished by a man who believed that he was above the law. My resolve was unbreakable, and a plan of community resistance was forming, a plan that would remind everyone that in Cedar Ridge, independent living was not just a right, it was a way of life. News of the incident spread rapidly throughout Crescent Meadows and the surrounding countryside. Social media erupted with the video footage Claire had captured, a clear, unfiltered account of the HOA president's trespass. Hashtags such as hashtag property rights, hashtag no more trespassing, and hashtag Cedar Ridge freedom began trending among residents, stirring long-suppressed frustrations and igniting a collective demand for accountability. Posts and comments flooded community forums, with neighbors exchanging similar stories of overreach and expressing solidarity with my cause. Local news stations picked up the story within hours. Reporters drove through the wooded roads of Cedar Ridge, capturing shots of our secluded cabin juxtaposed with the manicured lawns of Crescent Meadows. Interviews with shocked residents painted a picture of a community divided between strict conformity enforced by the HOA and the wild, untamed spirit of those who cherish their independence. "We deserve to live freely," one neighbor declared on live television, his voice laden with conviction. "Our property is our legacy, not some trophy to be judged by out-of-touch board members." The narrative was transforming from a single case of trespass to a broader discussion on the rights of rural homeowners to govern their own land. Within the halls of the HOA board, tensions simmered and then boiled over. Emergency meetings were convened behind closed doors, and leaked minutes soon surfaced online. These documents revealed a bitter internal conflict. While some board members still clung to the ideology of strict enforcement, a growing faction recognized that Marty Edward behavior had not only violated property rights, but also risked alienating the very residents the HOA was meant to serve. Heated debates echoed through the corridors of the boardroom, with one member angrily proclaiming, "If we allow this trespass to go unchallenged, soon no one will dare to exercise their rights, and our community will be nothing but a facade." The internal discord laid bare the fractures in a system long dominated by arbitrary rules and unquestioned authority. As the digital dossier of evidence grew, I received an outpouring of support through social media and community meetings. Neighbors shared their own experiences of unwarranted intrusions and fines, and an online petition demanding a full investigation into Marty Edwards' repeated trespasses quickly gathered thousands of signatures. Local bloggers and social media influencers joined the conversation, turning the hashtag Cedar Ridge Freedom into a rallying cry for justice and reform. The energy was palpable, a mounting wave of collective resistance against a system that had long suppressed individuality. During this period of heightened tension, I ramped up my efforts to ensure that every piece of evidence was meticulously documented and shared. I posted regular updates on my community blog, detailing every interaction, every phone call, and every sighting of Marty on my property. I also organized informal meetings at a nearby community center, where residents discussed the importance of property rights and debated potential reforms to the HOA's draconian policies. The more our voices united, the louder the call for change became. Marty Edwards, for his part, struggled to contain the backlash. His attempts to downplay the incident were met with scorn. In a series of hastily recorded video messages, he insisted that his actions were in the interest of community order and that he was merely upholding standards. However, every one of his statements was countered by the clear, irrefutable footage of him trespassing in my cabin and conducting himself as if he had authority over my land. The more he tried to justify his actions, the more the community saw him as a symbol of oppressive rule, a figure out of touch with the needs and rights of those who truly lived in Cedar Ridge. Local authorities eventually released a statement reinforcing that the police had no jurisdiction over private property trespassing, and that such matters were to be resolved within the legal framework of property rights. This endorsement by public officials only deepened the community's call for accountability. It was clear that Marty's actions had crossed a red line, and the people of Cedar Ridge were unwilling to tolerate it any longer. The digital pressure culminated in an announcement from the HOA board. A final public hearing would be held to address this matter, review the evidence, and determine necessary reforms to prevent future abuses. The announcement sent shockwaves through Crescent Meadows, and in the days leading up to the hearing, residents organized rallies and prepared to voice their demands. The energy was electric. This was a battle for our rights, and every shared post, every comment, every signature on the petition reinforced the resolve that change was inevitable. As the final hearing loomed, I continued to secure every bit of evidence, reaching out to legal experts who assured me that my rights as a property owner were unequivocal. With the community fully behind me, the stage was set for a dramatic showdown. a moment when the collective voice of Cedar Ridge would force the HOA board to confront not only Marty Edwards' trespassing, but also the broader culture of arbitrary enforcement that had long plagued our community. The decisive moment arrived on a cool, crisp morning as I made my way to the Cedar Ridge Community Center for the final public hearing. The boardroom was packed with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and hundreds of determined residents, all gathered to witness the resolution of a dispute that had become a symbol of our fight for property rights. My heart pounded in my chest as I took a seat among neighbors who, like me, believed that our land was ours to govern. With a calm, yet commanding presence, Councilwoman Linda Parker stepped up to the podium. After an exhaustive review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed logs, and the heartfelt testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion, she began, her voice resonant and authoritative. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mr. Aaron Cole's property and the subsequent unauthorized trespass by HOA President Marty Edwards were not justified by any legitimate concern for community order. Instead, they were driven by personal bias and an overreach of authority. A heavy silence fell over the room as Parker continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all sanctions related to this matter and will initiate a full disciplinary review of the practices that allowed such egregious violations of private property rights. Furthermore, new guidelines will be implemented to ensure that the rights of every resident, especially those who choose to live independently away from the conformity of urban standards, are rigorously protected. Today's decision is not just about reversing fines. It is a resounding statement that Cedar Ridge will always prioritize truth, justice, and individual freedom above all else. Her words struck a chord with the assembled crowd, and murmurs of approval rippled through the room. At that moment, a longtime community advocate, renowned for his defense of property rights, rose to speak. Today, we stand united, he declared, his voice firm and impassioned. No one in our community should ever have their right to live and work on their own property infringed upon by arbitrary rules. Let this hearing mark the turning point, a clear signal that Cedar Ridge values innovation, independence, and the sanctity of private property above all. We demand accountability, and we will not rest until every violation is met with swift, decisive action. His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting everyone in a shared call for reform. Following his address, a senior officer from the local legal affairs office presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert testimonies, and legal reviews confirming that my farm stand and overall property operations were fully within my rights. The evidence was irrefutable, and the internal review panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against any overreaching actions by the HOA. The full report was scheduled for immediate public release, ensuring complete transparency. Councilwoman Parker concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Ridge, a community where every individual's rights are respected and where public authority is exercised with fairness and integrity." Our vote today is a declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one, no matter how self-righteous, can impose their will on us without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live freely on our own property. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our struggle for property rights. In that defining moment, as every face in the room shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the united voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Ridge. The era of petty, arbitrary fines and trespasses was over. A future built on respect for individual rights had finally dawned. In the weeks that followed that historic vote, Cedar Ridge experienced an inspiring transformation. News of the rescinded sanctions and the sweeping reforms implemented by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media, social networks, and community newsletters. Editorials bearing headlines like "A New Dawn for Cedar Ridge" and "Community United for Justice" celebrated the decisive actions taken to protect every resident's property rights and creative freedom. Hashtags such as #PropertyRights, #NoMoreHOA bullying, and #LiveFreeCedarRidge trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand against arbitrary rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as neighbors gathered to share their stories and envision a future where local innovation was embraced rather than suppressed. Residents who had long felt intimidated by intrusive HOA policies now spoke openly about their right to manage their own property. "Our land is our legacy. It is our right to cultivate it as we see fit," one impassioned resident declared at a lively meeting, his words echoing through the crowded hall. The atmosphere was one of hope and renewal, a promise that Cedar Ridge would always defend the freedoms of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift and sweeping changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs on ethical governance, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that no resident would ever again be subjected to arbitrary fines or undue interference. "Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every homeowner," Lieutenant Reed affirmed at a subsequent press conference, underscoring our renewed commitment to fairness and justice. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations joined forces to empower residents. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns were organized to raise awareness about property rights and foster a culture of mutual respect and accountability. "When we stand together, no one can undermine our freedom," a local activist proclaimed at one town hall, inspiring neighbors to unite and call for change. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to stand up against HOA Marty Edwards' audacious trespass and to reclaim my property rights by defending my farm stand and showing the community what real independence looks like had ignited a movement far greater than I had ever imagined. Neighbors, once silenced by fear, now found their voices, sharing their own experiences and pledges to stand up against overreach. The digital evidence that exposed Marty's misdeeds became a symbol of hope, a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and the right to live freely. Karen Miller, once the formidable enforcer of arbitrary HOA rules, gradually became a cautionary tale. Her influence in Cedar Ridge faded as digital records of her past transgressions and the community's resounding call for reform circulated widely. Her attempts to govern through fear and micromanagement were rejected by a community united in its pursuit of justice and independent living. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Ridge, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered as the sun set behind the towering oaks. A grand banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Property Rights" was unfurled, and heartfelt speeches echoed promises of a brighter future. Today, we celebrate not only a victory against arbitrary interference, but also the triumph of independent spirit over outdated conformity, Councilwoman Parker proclaimed, her voice filled with conviction. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful testament to our collective commitment to defend our rights and ensure that every individual in Cedar Ridge may live freely without fear of bureaucratic overreach. As each day dawned over our reclaimed community, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how the HOA president trespassed into my cabin and how my vigilant wife, Claire, captured every moment on camera became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in protecting their home and legacy. Every sunrise now carried the promise that in Cedar Ridge, truth, justice, and personal freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over Cedar Ridge, it carried with it the promise that our community would always be a sanctuary of creativity, integrity, and respect for every individual's freedom to live as they choose.